Welcome to another episode of Event Marketing Redefined. I'm your host, Matt Kleinrock, CEO of Rockway Exhibits and Events. Today, really cool show. I have Naomi Clare Crellin on. She is the CEO, founder of Storycraft Labs. Storycraft Labs is all about the art and science of experiential engagement. So much of what we're going to talk about today is something I talk about all the time, which is knowing your audience when you are creating and executing events. I'm a big believer in going deeper and deeper in understanding that audience so you can deliver better, more curated experiences to them. So I'm super excited for Naomi to be on. Naomi, thanks for joining. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having us, Matt. I'm excited to chat to you about this topic, favorite topics.
Yes. When I first saw your work and kind of got a grip on like who you were and what you were doing, I was very intrigued, right? So I started doing a little bit of research, went down a little bit of rabbit hole because the audience thing does really like appeal to me. Like, I think it's such a niche thing that if you can get it right, you can really crank out some events the right way, whether it's a trade show booth or whether it's a host event, whatever it may be. Maybe it's a sales conference. It doesn't matter. You got to know the audience. So let's talk a little bit.
Sorry. Oh, I was going to.
No, go ahead.
What I had seen with audiences in my role as an educator, even before we started looking at kind of Storycraft Lab and business applications, was exactly what you just said, that the answer often lies with audience. So every time a student gets stuck or not, know how to make progress with an idea, I'd take them back to the audience. And every time they centered on what it was that the audience needed, it would unlock that forward momentum. And I'm glad that you share that affinity with the audience, because I think that there's magic there.
Well, I think certain audiences and certain types of individuals, they move a certain way. They want things a certain way, right? They express themselves a certain way. They intake information a certain way. So it's like the more that you know that, the more that, I don't want to say you can leverage it, because you're not really leveraging these people, but you are, as an event marketer, trying to deliver an experience. And if you understand them, you can deliver experience. So tell me a little bit. What I think is interesting is you have a little bit of a science behind what you're doing, right? And then that kind of folds into you're actually helping people with execution to utilize that science. So give me a little bit of breakdown on what you do at Storycraft and kind of how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. So audience advocacy is one of the things that we do. We do audience advocacy, we do content strategy, and we do innovation, experience innovation work, which is on the design side. When we look at the term audience advocacy, it came out of this real curiosity about audience, but also about empathy. What does it mean to be radically empathetic when we're looking at audiences? And I mentioned, like, when I was working with students in a design setting as an educator, they could take the time to sit with one person, get to know them really well as a persona, and do that empathy work of walking in somebody's shoes. But how on earth do you scale that to events where there are thousands of people walking through the journeys that we create? And I think that has always been the place where, on the business side of the creative work of events, creators have become stuck. How do we deliver empathy and personalization for our audiences at the kind of scale and speed of application that we have to work with in the experience design world? So that was where we really landed on the term audience advocacy.
It's an interesting term.
Yeah, it is. It came out of that engagement with Google's Experience Institute, and it was a gift from our client, Megan Henschel, there. And essentially, we were working with them, looking to understand audiences better and their evolving techno-social norms, very googly in a post-pandemic world. So the term audience advocacy essentially recognizes we're now in not just a post-pandemic world, but we're in a post-cookie marketing world where preference or first-party data is the new gold standard for audience insights. It also recognizes that it's a two-way street. The role of event marketing and designing of experiences is done with your audience, not just to them. Right. And what we found is that audiences now in this post-cookie world are willing to share preference data, but they have to trust that that data is being valued, that it's being
Mm.
used good, that it's being applied in ways that benefit them. Like they have to be able to see that they have taken the time to share their data and that it's now making an experience better for them. We're putting it to work. So the idea of kind of terming this audience advocacy as opposed to just audience insights or audience really kind of recognizes that the work that we do is a two-way street. It's that radical commitment that shifts how we have to think about audience measurement, the kind of the what, the when, and the where that it's happening. Yeah.
I think it's interesting the way, the idea of talking about preference, right?
Yeah.
First party data. The world has changed in the sense of like the trust that people have with their information, with their preferences, what they are actually seeking. So how are people who have this information better able to execute it when they can understand preferences, when they can understand, they feel trusting about giving away their first party data?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Audience advocacy without data, if we look at it from the other side, however noble the cause of that advocacy, is just somebody's opinion. And it
Mm.
is difficult to get traction in a business environment without the data to articulate what the impact is going to be to your stakeholders. So having these tangible insights about your audience, it streamlines their strategy. It helps make informed decisions
Mm.
about
Yeah.
design, about content curation, about delivery methods, about sales, pipeline, about
Mhm.
networking, all of the kind of problems that we've been encountering and wrestling with. A lot of it sits back with just truly understanding your audience. And we've seen that applied in so many different ways. It's something that the organizers need, but also audiences have been asking for personalization for a long time. I go
Yeah.
back years. It's been a pretty consistent metric between 70 and 75%
Yeah.
over the last few years. It wavers just by like one,
Mhm.
but it's still massive. Audiences want personalization.
Yeah.
But within experiences, we've been struggling how to do that at scale. And now that personal data is no longer available to drive the personalization to us, it
Yeah.
kind of compounds the problem. But actually, when you look at segmentation differently, that allows us to segment according to profiles,
Mhm.
that actually enables the demographic data that we collect to be much more useful,
Yeah.
right? All of a sudden, you can start to look at preferences. You can look at them as a whole, like your entire audience, or you can zoom in and say, all right, what are we seeing for trends in preference for this role? If we're looking at an architect versus a decision maker,
Yeah.
right? How do we think about them? What does it mean as we're putting them into those VIP executive decision-making conversations? What is
Mhm.
the data that we need to present to them? Do they need stories? Do they need specs? How do we move
Mhm.
them along that broader journey that we as marketers need events to be able to fulfill for us, right? So it's interesting in that as we're using experience profiles more broadly, we're seeing a huge range in applications. NASA used it to drive content gen. So
Mhm.
they would, no, well, pun intended. There's a universe of content at NASA about what NASA does, and people were struggling to navigate it.
Yeah.
So, they actually used the preferences to give people these different ways of navigating the content. IMEX is using it this year to facilitate curated networking sessions. They heard from their audiences that they needed help with networking.
Mm.
Going through those networking experiences. So that's what they're using the experience profiles to drive. Trimble Agriculture used it at the farm show
Mm.
to drive sales conversations, right? Depending on the quiz results and how you answer the questions, they'd send you to different demos, and the salespeople would be prepped to understand how to speak to these different folks.
I
So,
love that. I mean,
yeah.
the one thing you said that really sticks out to me, you're saying, do they need stories or specs, right? So you're talking about engaging, selling somebody, trying to have a meaningful interaction at an event. So do you need stories or specs? And I think what has me thinking how interesting that is, like, I look at our clients and the broad range of what they do. And then I think about them selling into their clients. And I'm like, okay, we got one client who sells into middle-aged men who are engineers, right? They are predominantly male. They just are. We have another client that sells into a wide range of women that are in HR. They are just predominantly women. The age varies, but they tend to be above 45. Like there's just, those people are different. I don't care what you say.
Yeah, I am not the same as every other 45-year-old woman, right? It's
yes, there's commonalities. There's things that you can find. And I think what I love about this is like, you have to be able to speak their language to a degree. You have to be able to present to them. You have to be able to engage with them in a way to them that makes sense versus, you're not going to nail every single person because everybody's unique in their own way, but there's a lot of commonalities in the way they think through problems.
Totally. And that's
retain information.
Kind of all we all need, right? As self-aware humans that are in the business of building relationships and helping people to move or change behaviors. It's some clues that kind of take away the friction and the discomfort, right? The amount of times that people will roll their eyes and go, oh, I don't want to go into a booth, to have a sales conversation. It's because it's not a pleasurable experience. But if we can take away those things that are uncomfortable and actually are more delightful, like I go in and they say, oh, Naomi, okay, so I'm going to sit down. I'm going to tell you, I know that you're a people-oriented person. I'm going to tell you a story of the human impact of this particular product, what I've seen it do, and all of a sudden, the things that made me uncomfortable are just not even present anymore. Somebody's talking to me about something that I value, that connects with, and I feel seen and I feel considered, in a way that otherwise we don't do, not for any malintent, but just because we don't have the information,
So tell me about, I know in your sort of process and the way that you work through this when you help companies, you have what you would consider to be 6 preferences, correct?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Let's talk about those. Let's kind of dive into those and what that process looks like and, the differentiation between them.
Totally. Okay. They're called the experience profiles, and they're based around preference models. We look at 4 preference sets. These are all academic models that are out there for social preference, interpretive preference, learning preferences, and leadership preferences. So each of the profiles has this unique Venn diagram that makes them special and who they are. You've got so the core product has 6 of these. You have the seeker, who's this more kind of outgoing, expressive person, more of a kind of igniter of teams, or you've got the creator, highly creative, expressive, visionary. There's the adapter, who's more of an innovator, really interested in mixing things up in the tech side of things. We've got the explorer, who's more of an independent mind, a harmonizer, the human-centered human, and then there's the thinker, who's this more kind of data-oriented, analytical figure.
Okay, so seeker, creator, adapter, explorer, harmonizer, and thinker.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And then we will tailor them, again, depending on the audience. So I remember the first time we did it with actually a group called Trimble Transportation. They said, listen, for our audience who are primarily male and in the trucking industry, telling somebody else that they're a harmonizer is just not going to fly. So we reskinned, right? And we actually reskinned for that one. Everybody got a route number. So you could be Route 66 or Route 95. And that was the out. Or for the America's SAP user group, we reskinned them as the SAP superhero profiles. So that got kind of rewritten with AI and a superhero tone of voice and made specific to that audience. But those are the core 6. And then we've got one version where we drop down to 4 if it's a smaller group.
So tell me a little bit about each of these, like seeker, creator, adapter, explorer, harmonizer, thinker. Tell me some of the differences, like how experiences would be curated differently for them. Give me some, I don't know if you have any examples or specifics on like how, if your customer was a seeker versus a harmonizer, essentially how you may approach them differently.
Yeah. And one of the things that we do with the experience profiles is work with the event creators to make what we call a trail guide. So it actually gives people recommendations for where to go. We also we look at the different profiles and we think about how they synergize and they work in teams with one another. So, for example, the harmonizers and the thinkers synergize really well together. And that's because the thinker is quite an analytical, sometimes solitary individual, but the harmonizer pulls them into the group domain a little, right? So the harmonizer is more of this kind of active listener, right? That really kind of tunes into what people need to get them to really connect with the team. So they function really well to bring the thinker into the domain. But the harmonizer then also benefits from that interaction because the thinker will prod them. The harmonizer is often in this role of talking about what the group wants or needs. But when they're talking to the thinker is saying, but I want to know what you think, harmonize. Tell me what your process is. So it actually it's this really nice energy between the two. The seekers and the adapters work really well together. The seekers, like this igniter figure, they like to get everybody together to like, let's go do something. Let's, whatever that aspect, very active and hands-on. And the adapter isn't necessarily quite so social as the seeker, but just loves to see the outcome of new things and experimentation. So they are 100% along for the ride. And the seeker needs the adapter to be like there for that activity and jump in and do their lead. And then the creator and the explorer work really well together. The explorer being this more solitary figure or independent mind, I would say. They come and check back in with the group, but they like to plan their own journey and have a lot of agency over that and kind of go and see new things and do new things. But it'll be the creator that helps to translate what they've learned along the way to other people. I think about it in terms of the explorer goes on this epic journey, but it's the creator that creates the Insta-worthy presentation that goes viral that people love to see. Right. So but the creator benefits because the explorer is kind of giving them all of this new vision of the world,
How would you advise me? Say I was like an event marketer. We were friends and we were just having a cup of coffee and we were talking and, I couldn't afford your services, right? But essentially I have to execute trade shows. I have to execute an event for my company. What would you advise them to do to like get more in tune with their customer and who their audience is so they could curate the experience better? How would you advise them?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing you can do is look at ways in which you can accommodate all of the preferences that are out there, right? And choose a model, like think about social preferences and how does that shape the way that you would consider networking, for example, through the lens of social preference. Right? Are people introverted, extroverted? What do they, is it an activity that they need or really good conversation starters? Or, what are the things that we could do to ensure that everybody finds a place of comfort and support? Similar as well when you're looking at your learning sessions, right? And the educational content that you deliver. Making sure that you've got a wide range, that it's not all just death by PowerPoint, but there's also a good amount of those participatory sessions, some which are problem-solving oriented as opposed to purely technical education, Because I think and we have recommendations, obviously, for all of the preferences about kind of what would jive, but I think your question was, if we couldn't have this product, how do we begin?
If I couldn't afford you.
Yeah.
What would you tell me to do?
I would say think broadly about just making sure that everybody has a place of comfort. And as you're looking through the different aspects of your design, consider are these different abilities included?
Tell me a little bit about the surveys that you do before you do some before an event, correct?
Yeah. So usually the experience profiles quiz, it can be launched at really at the start. You could have a call to action on the results page that will push to registration, for example. Sometimes it's launched as close up to the event as like a week before, which you won't get the most out of it that way.
Tight,
I've begun, and we've seen great results there. So we ask questions. The standard product has 13 questions, a baker's dozen of questions, and they ask about those preferences. So we're asking about your social preferences, your interpretive preference, your learning, and your leadership preference. So sometimes we put them in kind of very concrete examples, right? You're given a piece of furniture to deliver, to put together, and how do you do that? Do you read those instructions meticulously? Do you pop open YouTube and do like an unboxing thing, or are you going to call a friend, or are you just going to jump right in and build the thing? Which is usually like the way that I do things, is I'll attempt to build it and then 20 minutes later find myself trying to dig the instructions out of the corner, right?
You can sign me up on that list.
Right, there you go. I can tell. So we ask some questions which are to putting people in a moment and asking them to make a choice.
I love that.
Some are much more direct. Like if you're turning up to a conversation, what is more joyful for you? Are you feeling more confident if you understand the questions in advance so you can prepare a response?
Yeah.
Or do you just enjoy going with the flow? Right? Just turn up and all of a sudden things are sparking, and there's some serendipity in there as well as insights, and that's something that energizes you more. So it's a mix of questions, and we've got a behavioral scientist on the team now who's helping us craft those questions. His name's Henry Lopez. He's doing a great job. And we do, when we work with AI to rewrite, if we were to rewrite those questions in a superhero tone, it's like, how would you gather your team of folks together? We'll go through the AI and really make sure that there's some actual human intelligence applied to the results as well,
I'm glad you mentioned the social learning, leadership, and interpretive piece there.
Yeah.
Because I kind of brushed over that when we were talking about the 6, personality types or preferences, right? But interesting that I'm hearing you say is like, it's the way people want to interact. It's the way that people interpret things, the way, like, some people are learners if they can teach it to somebody. Some people have to read something. Everybody obtains knowledge differently. So I feel like one of the things I want to make clear for people, and I get caught on this, we talk about who's your customer, right? And always trying to harp people that, but like sometimes just knowing that it's a 35-year-old dude that's not married and doesn't have kids yet, or is under 35, like, is not what we're saying. That's not the answer to understanding them, right? The makeup is like, what I love the way you're posing questions in your surveys. And I think that's something that people could take who are listening to this, because a lot of people run surveys. It's the way you ask the question, right? I love you said, where do you find joy in X? How do you, what I mean? How do you, do you want to be prepared? Do you want to just walk into a conversation? Do you, like, all those things it makes people think to themselves, how would I want to do that? And opens up to who they really are.
It's so interesting. Yeah. One of the big insights that we've had out of questions we were asking, how do you know that you have really acquired knowledge during a learning session? And what we were seeing is consistently across all audiences, between 45 and 55% of people were saying it's when I can articulate what I've learned to other people. That meant for some of the events where we were starting to see that response come in, and it was closer to the event and the program's locked and we're in production mode, right? We're just like, we're rolling. It meant for us, what we did was we looked at like, okay, where's there 15 to 20 minutes in a corridor in an adjacent space of like unprogrammed, where we can do a pop-up design sprint that just like literally gives people the mic to share what they've learned, because then they're leaving an event really highly aware of the value that they have gotten out of that experience, which means that they're going to rate it better. But unless you ask, you're not going to know. I think that's the limitation of demographics. There's like a meme, I think, which you could probably find on the interwebs, where they compare like Ozzy Osbourne and King Charles, right? They compare these two dudes that are same age, in their 70s, both British, both married twice, both live in a castle.
Mhm.
But, then you've got Ozzy Osbourne on the one side and King Charles on the other. I could tell you they'd probably have very different preferences when it comes to
Yes.
entertainment and socializing and
Mhm.
communication and all of those things. But, you
I'd
know,
imagine they do.
yeah, I would imagine. I can't imagine them talking to one another. It might be quite amusing, but, I think as an example, as you were saying, of, just breaking apart these giant monoliths,
Mhm.
which in the worst world can become quite discriminatory, if we're not careful about it. But it gives us a tool to really start to understand beyond, demographics can be very surface level.
Mhm.
We're really looking for people to connect and to share preferences and values and interests. Then it's those kinds of questions that enable people to open up. But the trick is then that they do hold event organizers
Yeah, as they
to,
should.
like do something with that information,
Yeah.
you know?
Do you on the note with questions, do you have any advice for people that are running surveys and asking questions? Is there a method to framing a question? Is there a way of going about asking questions that maybe you feel is more effective?
hmm we do a lot of iteration when we're putting our questions together to just get them more and more concise,
Mhm.
and we'll go through the questions that we use a number of times and check it with other people. So if you're putting a quiz together and you're not sure if you're using the right word or term, show it to some friends. Just get their take on it, because you'll begin to hear, like, oh, when I see this word, this is what it means to me. And if that comprehension of a word, for example, is inconsistent, then you need to go back and find one that will be consistently understood. The other thing that we've been working with on our quizzes to make them unusual, because sometimes quizzes can feel quite computery and unhuman, right? Is actually kind of striking a balance between, what is good protocol from a scientific perspective and a research perspective on the questions, with how do you have a human tone of voice, right? Some of it can simply be, like I said, what sparks joy for you,
Yeah,
right?
that's very human. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about asking a human question as opposed to, on a scale of 0 to 10, how would you assess the ability of this to do
Oh,
X?
gosh,
All of
make
a
me fall
sudden,
asleep.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that the more actually that you can stay away from numbers is helpful.
Mm.
People get a little bit of analysis paralysis when you ask them to do numbers.
Yeah, like how is this event scale of 1 to 10?
Well, against what in compare, and if I just said
Yeah, no, yeah.
last question, is 8 really fair? And now do I have to go back and revise question 3 so that I'm being consistent? So it kind
Yeah.
of throws people into a totally different mindset. And I think that that's where we've had some real success. We're seeing with the experience profiles some really good response and return rates. So for the America's SAP user group, about 56% of attendees returned that quiz and shared their preferences. And that one they launched 8 days before the event. So that was one that was really close. But in comparison to the standard post-event survey, that's between 5 and 8%, we're really, really happy if we get
It's
8%.
high numbers. Yeah. I mean,
Right,
that's
and that's at that point the
nine,
data
10x
still
there. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and SEMA was 80, so the Corporate Event Marketers Association, that was 84% of event attendees had taken the quiz. And I think some of it is about the nature of the questions. Some of it is about the profile result.
Hmm.
People just kind of love sharing who they are on
Hmm.
social media.
Yeah.
It's interesting content and a bit more compelling than I'm going to, right? As something that's shareable.
Tell me about the sense of belonging, right? I think that's something that like all humans need, right? It's in the hierarchy of needs, right? Maslow's hierarchy
That's
of needs. So,
yes, yeah, yeah.
um,
The
I
mass
find it I find it interesting. Like people, for example, we were at Exhibitor Live in I don't know, February, March, maybe.
wow.
And there was an event marketer there that we know that we talked to. It's been on our podcast. We were hanging out a little bit. talking, we were, creating content, doing podcasts, and just around each other. And a lot of the conversation things we're talking about, she had made a comment to me that really resonated. She's like, I found my people. And I think she was talking about us, others that were involved and engaged in these conversations, and people we knew. And I feel like she felt seen, she felt heard, she felt like that. To me, was a sense of belonging. Like she felt like she belonged into our group. So I think that's a very powerful thing for humans, because we all want to belong to something. So tell me a little bit about like how, I don't want to say you're leveraging such a bad term, but how you're sort of using that sense of belongingness, how you're
Yeah.
measuring it, because I know you're measuring it as well. It's just really interesting. So talk to me about that.
It's really, yeah, it is so interesting. So I mentioned our initial work with Google's Experience Institute,
Mm-hmm.
which started playing with the experience profiles and looking at how to use them for their community. And in that research, we were asking people a lot of questions about what they needed from experiences, what they meant to them. And we heard about belonging through those conversations with such frequency, such volume, really, that Megan and Google asked us to open up a parallel piece of work to investigate belonging. And we came up with a framework. We went off on a complete journey and talked to people for about a year to find out about
Wow.
belonging. Yeah, it was a lot. It was 2,000 different insights and quotes I think we collected across these conversations. And what we found was that belonging is not a binary thing. It is absolutely a journey. It is often something that begins way pre-event, right? So it often begins even in the digital space before we turn up to a face-to-face experience. And as we workshopped it and took it around to different events in 2023, we did find that there were 3 top definitions of belonging, or touch points on a belonging journey. One of them was finding your people. One of them
Yeah.
is connection, and the other one is trust. So I think that that's kind of like the current zeitgeist. But then what we found as we looked at different industry verticals and different organizations was that each group was returning these different keywords in their definitions of belonging. It was almost like each group had this unique belonging DNA. And there were some places where, marketers were similar to fintech. They could have a couple of touch points in common, but then the rest of their touch points might be kind of very different in terms of ranking. So it kind of gave folks the wheel of belonging is what we called it as an exercise. And it gave organizers a way to create a space for their audience to share what belonging means to them. That information is really valuable for us as organizers because it means we know where to focus our efforts first when it comes to community and programming and meeting the needs of folks so that they can feel the way that you described. Belonging is absolutely a human need. Maslow did put it right in the middle of the pyramid. It was almost like this gateway through which all humans must pass to access the truest expressions of themselves and their maximum potential. But I think what's really, really interesting in the last couple of years is that we are starting to see data, hard business-like facts that are coming out of the business world, not so much sociology or psychology in terms of advocating for the individual human, but it's from the world of business. It's coming from groups like Deloitte and Harvard Business Review and Forbes. And we're starting to see the evidence now stack up that shows, there are a number of statistics, but the big one, the really big one that I think we should be concerned with is that individuals who experience belonging are 167% more likely to recommend, right? So I think we all know in the marketing world, the power of a recommendation in getting people to make the decision to purchase and moving them from the messy middle through that consumer cycle. So that's really interesting in that when we look at the unit of measurement that we've been using to assess event success has been the Net Promoter Score, which comes down to a question around your willingness to recommend an event to somebody else, which I think is wonderful, actually. It means, belonging can be measured. And surprise, surprise, a lot of the ways that we have been assessing engagement is how we can measure a sense of belonging, right? So if somebody feels belonging, they're more likely to participate in conversations in the chat and turn up with an energy where they want to connect with other people and do deals and talk about the future and share. When you take belonging away, then those numbers go down.
I think it's interesting what you're saying about 167% more likely to recommend when they do feel like they belong. And then I think the idea of it's so simple in the such that if you are trying to engage people, if you are trying to, whether it's at a trade show booth or whether it's at an event or whether it's inside of a session, people tend to be settled when they feel that they belong, when they feel that they're in a safe place, when they feel like people have similar interests, there's just a huge comfort to it. So trying to be able to recreate that at events for people, I think is a challenge, but I also think that it's vital to the success of the event. And when you use the term energy, I thought that was really interesting because I think that when I've been in events and just being around people, energy matters, and people's energies tend to match each other or pull from each other.
Mm-hmm.
You are always wanting energy to match and sort of raise each other. And that's when you can feel it. That's when you can feel that you're in this room, you're in this conversation, and it gets end up tying back to just emotional pulls and how you feel about something, which ties me back to how are you setting that up for people? Like how are you giving your best crack as an event marketer to set that up for them and give it the biggest chance of success?
And I believe that the key lies in the pre-event touch points. One of the things that we found as we were talking to people about what belonging means, it became apparent that belonging is a journey, right? You don't just flip a switch and all of a sudden you belong, but actually they're like a series of steps that people take as they approach an event. So in order for an event, like a moment in time, to help people achieve belonging, they actually have to have started their journey towards belonging before they even cross the threshold of that physical environment, right? So if they have fears or concerns, will there be people like me? Will it be relevant to my needs? Those are things that we need to address in the pre-event journey so that by the time they turn up at your booth or at your event, they're well on the way and you're just kind of helping them make that final connection. And they've got that energy to meet people and they've got that confidence. The anxiety or the uncertainty or the discomfort is not holding them anymore. We've addressed it.
Do you have any examples of that, like ways you've done that before, like the way to cut through that? Because I think that's like people always have preconceived ideas as they're coming to events or coming to a booth or coming to something. So like, what's ways you've kind of cut through that to sort of, give them a little bit more comfort to get their questions answered?
Yeah, there are a few different ways. With XI days, with the Google event days, we had docents. So we had actual humans that were doing outreach, whose pictures were posted, their interests were there. They were tagged for folks that might have needs in terms of neuro inclusion and unseen disabilities. So that was one way of accommodating that and just making sure that people could see who else was joining and where they'd be pre-event. The experience profiles, honestly, is huge. When we've partnered up with Ingo to amplify the experience profiles on LinkedIn, it has been the energy that we see that's something that we miss a little bit as experience creators and builders, right? From our perspective, on our side of the fence, putting an event together, those last few weeks before an event, very scary, busy. We are working hard and getting everything in place. And we're very afraid to overwhelm people's inboxes. We've got, a very kind of lockdown notification. But from the audience perspective, they want to get excited. They want to see who's going to be there. And so then they can make a connection and turn up. And that's what we've seen with the experience profiles when they go onto LinkedIn, and we'll see it again with IMAX in a week or so.
Gotta hype it up. You gotta be
Totally.
communicating.
And what was lovely about that is like somebody would post and say, I'm a harmonizer, and their friends would jump on, or somebody who does it like, I'm a harmonizer too. Oh my goodness, we have something in common. Or yes, of course you are. You're the most human friendly person I know. They would use it as an excuse to say kind things to one another. And the amount of comments where we're like, let's meet up. We've got to meet up. Okay, I will definitely get some time aside. Just helps people, I think, get over that hump and start to get excited. So then there can be like the tailored communications can start coming out. You can send out those trail guides with recommendations, and people can plan their journeys out as well. But a lot of it, there was a Marriott event where they did, and this didn't use the experience profiles, but it was a similar thought. They used what they called was flocks. So they replaced the normal know before you go with a Zoom call where, people could get together. They put them into groups. They had first timers talk to people that had been before, exchange advice, and then they created a space where they could meet up on site. So
I like that.
It's not hugely complex, but it's about giving people the tools just to be with one another,
And a little bit of comfort. You know what it makes me think? When my wife and I got married, we got married near where we live, right? And we had a lot of family come in from out of town, right? Because neither of us grew up where we live. And so one of the things, being an event person, I was very detailed on some things that I wanted. And, I knew people were coming in for multiple days. They make a weekend of it. A lot of people are planners. So like, I know when I travel, I want my stuff planned. I want to know where I'm going to dinner. I want to know what my transportation looks like. I want to know all those things. And people that are not really planners, they just don't care. They're just going to wing it and they're going to go with it no matter what. So one of the things that we did that inevitably got really great feedback that is actually reminding me of is we put this little sheet together that was at the check-in with their hotel. And we gave them a list of restaurants that are within 5-10 minutes for what's good for breakfast, what's good for lunch, what's good for brunch, what's good for dinner, what's good if you're with a large group, what's good if you're with just the two of you or something. We gave people these lists, and it was all the best recommendations, like where to go, what to do. We got so many people that were like, oh, that was the best. We utilized it the whole weekend. And I think it kind of cut the tension for some people when they showed up, because it's something they were concerned with or something that they were worried about, which I think you could do with events.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting that sometimes, and that changes a little bit, right? The nature of the work that we do. It's not that you had to choose a restaurant and set all of the details up, right? You kind of gave people options for what worked for them, right? And I think that
go here. If you want this, go there. Yeah.
But then they became like the authors of their own experience because they'd made the selection that resonated with their needs and preferences. And I think that flips us on our heads a little bit. As planners, we're so used to controlling outcomes, but actually we need to just control the spaces for people to come together and share.
I like that. Controlling the spaces. I like that a lot versus the outcomes.
Right. That's a whole lot of letting go.
I think, what's funny though, is I think most people are looking for that. Like there's a big change in events these days. There's a new narrative to them. There's a bit of a different vibe. And I think a lot of what people are asking for is, I don't want to call it white space, but they want to have these peer-to-peer discussions. They want time to be able to truly collaborate and have conversation that, like you're saying, you said having control over the space, but not over the outcome, I think is what you said, right? I think people are seeking that because I have this whole, I think that the value of events have changed over the last 10 years, right? They used to be the place that you had to go because you could see people that you normally couldn't see or get in touch with. That's no longer the case. You can get in touch with anybody. You can find anybody nowadays, right? So
hyper-connected digitally.
Everyone's connected. So now the events have doubled down on the value of being face-to-face, the value of collaborating and learning from each other.
Yeah. And it's because all of those things, the blank space where people can add their mark, their voice, meet other people,
Yeah.
that's inherently tied to belonging, that sense that
Absolutely.
you're creating, you're building, you're part of something bigger than yourself, you're
Yeah.
heard, you're seen. And I think that's what is magical to me about the work of belonging, is that it almost requires us as creators to let go of our assumptions and desire to control. And it's a little bit like an abundance mindset.
Mhm.
Because when you create that blank space, people will return to you more information than you ever had about them in the first place if you had controlled the outcome. And in many ways, that's the nature of the experience profiles
Yeah.
quiz. It's a blank space for people to tell us what matters to them.
What's funny about you saying that is I think that a lot of what people are seeking nowadays when they go to events is they don't want to pitch for 3 days. And that's what events used to be. And like, sponsorships are sold as a pitch. Like, hey, you can buy this and we'll let you pitch that. And it's like, my advice, just listening to you and then seeing what's going on in events and listening to people and kind of trying to connect the dots, is like, be the facilitator of what people want,
Yeah.
not what you want to sell them, right? Because they know it's a pitch. They sniff bullshit. People, they know.
And they also know your product, right?
Yes,
And
they know. Yeah. Like they can look it up on their phone.
Yeah.
They can look up on their phone in 2 seconds.
Right.
They know.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like these days where you have to give them your feature and benefits. You don't.
You
got to get them to know you.
They want relationships. They want connection.
Yeah.
They want insights. They need things that they can use that help them to flourish in their lives, right? And the sale will happen.
Yeah, if you do it right. I agree.
Those things, it will happen. And I am really positive. I am seeing an industry shift towards this thing. But it's going to be an ongoing journey, I think, for the industry, because we do have to kind of keep opening up those realms of advocacy. But the more data we collect, the more it proves through.
Tell me about any of like event marketers, like corporate event marketers. Are they seekers, creators, adapters, explorers, harmonizers, thinkers? Do you know that?
Event planners tend to land in the harmonizer category.
Okay.
Marketers have a good splash more of the thinkers mixed in with harmonizers, and then a good number of seekers too.
Yeah, the seeker was one that stood out to me just based on knowing so many event marketers. I know they externally process, right? They're outgoing. They want to talk things out. They want to think tank things. They want to share. I find them to all be similar in that sense.
Yeah. But there were and there were places where there were a lot of similarities. The survey question where I mentioned before, we were getting consistent results that showed that people liked to be able to talk about they've acquired with people. For the SEMA audience, for example, the corporate event marketers, that particular question was 75% of them responded with that one answer out of 4. Whereas most surveys, it does look like it's high scoring, but it's more 45 to 55%. So the SEMA was much higher, which was interesting. And then we've done some with cybersecurity or financial analysis, which tend to be very heavily in the thinker category. There's quite a few explorers as well, I will say, in the event marketing world. They're quite kind of these.
I believe that for sure.
That like to go out and just try new experiences. Yeah.
From all the work that you're doing and all the research that you're doing and studying people and doing these surveys and then putting sort of whatever data science to action, right?
Yeah.
What kind of trends are you seeing? What kind of positive trends are you seeing in events that you can relay, or like just good momentum that you're seeing?
So I'm seeing an interest in new means of data capture, right? There's some experimentation that's going on with emotions and sentiments and how we capture that kind of meta. But one of the things we heard when we did some research for a Marriott trends report was that people were kind of turned off by the idea of trends. But it was almost like, you know, we want to talk about things that are impactful and
Yeah.
meaningful and sustainable. As an industry, we're a little bit less likely to chase the annual trend, right?
Yeah.
'Cause it's like if it's trending right now, hot right now, we've already missed it. You know, it's going to be
Mhm.
change. The speed of change is accelerating.
Mhm.
So I think there's a little bit of a fatigue from a strategic sense of chasing trends, but instead, from a strategic point of view, event marketers are wanting to know, like, what should I be organizing resources around with a like 5, 10 year,
Mm.
right? And that was where we started to look at in those conversations, what is changing and what is not changing. What do we really believe is around for a while? And that, you know, I started at the top of the call talking about personalization. This is like one of those facts that has been around for a while, but we haven't figured out yet. It's still not going anywhere, right? Audiences are still requesting it. So I think that that is something that we're starting
Mhm.
to see as a trend. You know, there's this interesting in the research that we're doing, there's this interesting kind of balance that's being struck with how quickly the world is moving, especially in the world of technology, um, and software, those industries. But also as event marketers, what are the legacies that we're trying to create within our jobs, right? There's a great search for meaning.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's happening, you know, with organizations and individuals, understanding value statements and mission and kind of aligning with those. But for a lot of event marketers, there is some question as you reach a certain point within an organization, what is the legacy of the work that I'm doing for this brand, for this team here? And that is coming back, as you've pointed out, is coming back to audience and
Yeah.
really kind of rethinking how we're using the data to understand the people that make up the humans that make up our audiences.
I like that. If you were given a keynote, right? Let's say you were given a keynote presentation and you were giving it to, global heads of events at
Mhm.
corporate companies or, directors of field marketing and, people running events for corporate companies.
Mhm.
What do you think would be the three main, if you had to break the presentation up into three main points, three main things that you wanted to drive home? What would those three things be?
I think I'd start off with the business value of belonging and the data that's starting to coalesce
Yeah.
now. It's like stars in a constellation that is pointing us
Yep.
that direction. So we'd start with the data of belonging and how we can use it to make arguments, decisions. Then I think I'd share the wheel of belonging, the research that we've been doing. It's an ongoing research project and the kind of insights that return from there. And at that point, the third piece, I'd kind of like to break the keynote mold and have those folks there actually submit some of their big challenges. Like, what are the things that they really wish they could achieve and they've been trying to move the needle on, but for whatever reason haven't yet? And I'd invite like a broad conversation around how an understanding of your audience can really kind of crack the nut on some of those big problems.
That's awesome. Naomi, thanks for talking to me today. Thanks for spending time with me. I think your view is fascinating and I think the work that you're doing is very cool. Taking those emotions like belonging and trying to um set events up for success with information and making people feel, this sense of ease, this sense of, really giving them a good experience. I think it's awesome and I think it's really needed. So thank you. And I appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I really appreciate being included and having the opportunity to talk about my favorite topics with you.
Yeah, no, it was a blast. And for everybody listening, that's a wrap. It's another episode of Event Marketing Redefined. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you so much.